So in business, it's important to be able to sense what's happening in fast-changing markets and also to be able to respond to this. The field of strategic management deals with the intended and the unintended initiatives taken by decision makers within organisations, and these decisions generally involve the allocation of the resources within the business itself. The purpose here is to enhance the performance of the firm in its external environment, but actually recognising and choosing a good strategy can be difficult. And if we assume that the aim of effective strategy is to deliver the purpose set out for the strategy in the first place, then to be effective, any strategy needs to have a clear aim. So in terms of learning outcomes, by the end of this session you should be able to firstly describe the key challenges facing the strategic decision maker in terms of choosing appropriate strategic options. Also, you should be able to describe the key elements of the strategy evaluation process through reflection on a real life case. And lastly, you should be able to apply the strategy evaluation techniques shown here to your own chosen business case for your group assignment. Now, the term strategy has been so widely used for different purposes that it's lost any clearly defined meaning. For our purposes, a strategy is a set of policies, objectives and plans that, taken together, define the scope of the enterprise and its approach to survival and success. Alternatively, we could say that the particular policies, plans, objectives of business express its strategy for coping with a complex competitive environment. So when looking at strategy, we need to understand how business leaders, managers and decision makers are able to evaluate the various strategic options that are available to them in order to determine the most appropriate course of action. Or in other words, how do they actually make the right choices? And remember here that strategy can be either prescriptive or emergent. Now, many companies argue that they need to have a strategic plan in order to plan ahead in terms of the competitive environment, covering key business functions such as sales or product development. Some of these strategies can take years to develop and put into practice, but we've also seen that other companies have a more entrepreneurial and experimental approach to strategy, and this approach can involve a very different range of issues. So in this session, we're going to explore some of the key theory around strategy evaluation and choice, and we'll put this in context using the real-world example of Tesco plc. Now remember that the group assignment for this module asks you to develop a group strategic management report, which involves selecting and applying a range of appropriate management tools, such as those highlighted in previous sessions, to a business which shows clear evidence that it has not performed as well as it could have. But the assignment also asks you to identify the specific strategic challenges which your chosen business has faced, and also to make strategic recommendations around how they can improve their short and their long-term performance across the range of business functions. So in order to make these recommendations, you'll need to evaluate the range of potential strategic choices which the business could take, select what you believe to be the most appropriate choice of strategy, and then provide a brief explanation of why you feel this is a suitable strategic choice for your chosen business. In general terms, a strategy that fails to meet the stated objectives of the business is strongly suspect, and it clearly fails to perform the key functions that are necessary for the survival and growth of the business. In this session, I'll take you through a process for this using the case of Tesco, drawing on relevant data from the company's own 2018 annual report, and a copy of this can be found on the Moodle site for this module. Now, strategy cannot be created or adjusted to changing circumstances without a process of strategy evaluation. Whether performed by an individual or as part of an organisational review procedure, strategy evaluation forms an essential step in the process of guiding a business. In general terms, the aim of business strategy evaluation is to provide answers to these three basic questions. Firstly, are the business objectives appropriate? Then, are the key policies and plans which have been put in place to support these objectives appropriate? And also, do the results obtained to date confirm or refute the key assumptions on which the strategy rests? In order to answer these questions, we must focus on three key areas: strategic analysis, strategic development, and strategy implementation. Strategic analysis focuses on aspects such as the operating environment for the business, the resources available, and the company's vision, mission and objectives. Strategic development is concerned with the logical selection between options in order to find the most advantageous strategic route forward. The last area considered is strategy implementation, which is concerned with resource allocation, strategic planning control, people issues and strategic change. However, it's also important here that we distinguish between the content and the process of strategy. Strategy content is the actual strategy that is selected to meet the objectives of the organisation, while strategy process is a process of communication discussion amongst those who will contribute to the development and then the implementation of the strategy. Directors, managers and other stakeholders may all be involved in developing the strategic content. Each person or group will contribute its own perspectives, interests and motivations to the process, and some of this information may be contradictory, incomplete or simply misleading. The strategic process can impact on strategic content, and this is usually treated as a separate topic in strategy and is often referred to as strategic change. In other situations, stakeholders work willingly to implement the strategic plan once it's been agreed, and for such situations the process is primarily concerned with developing the strategic plan itself. Strategy evaluation can take place as an abstract analytical task. Often it's performed by consultants, but also it can be an integral part of an organisation's processes of planning, review and control. In some organisations, evaluation is informal, only occasional, brief and cursory. Others have created elaborate systems containing formal periodic strategy review sessions. In either case, though, the quality of strategy evaluation and ultimately the quality of corporate performance will be determined more by the organisation's capacity for self-appraisal and learning rather than by the particular analytic technique employed. It's important to remember here that each business strategy is unique to the business itself, and no strategy is ultimately right or wrong in an absolute sense. The chosen business strategy may in time be proven to be effective or ineffective for the firms in question, but the focus of strategy evaluation must be the application of logic that does not focus on finding one best way or approach, but instead can be tailored to guide the business through each new problem it faces in any given situation. Now, in the case of Tesco, which can be seen from the annual report, this is a company which has been performing well in the short term. And we can see that the long-term strategy is intended to secure the long-term fortunes of the company through a focus on a number of key aspects such as the promotion of healthy eating, the development of exclusive brands, and business growth through the development of a range of key partnerships. And these are broad strategies which would be expected to impact positively on the business, but will take a long time to work through the business itself in order to deliver significant impact. So we're looking at a long-term strategy here. Particularly difficult problems arise when stakeholders are forced to implement a plan to which they've not contributed, and perhaps which even threatens their existence or their areas of responsibility. Before choosing any strategy, it should be evaluated against the organisation's purpose, mission and objectives, and the strategy should build on competitive resources and capabilities such as support for branding, innovative capability or core competencies, and we can clearly see evidence of these in the strategic drivers for Tesco. Here the strategy builds on the company's core areas of strength such as brand awareness and innovation, which the company is widely known for. So when thinking about how we select the most suitable strategic option for the business, we need to think about 6 different criteria. Firstly, we need to consider which of the various strategic options available are consistent with the purpose and objectives of the organisation, and this is a prime test for evaluating and selecting strategies. Next, we need to think about the suitability of the strategy for the environment within which the organisation actually operates. Also, we need to look at the validity of the projections and data used in developing the option, and these must be tested, and this is commonly done through the use of marketing research data. The next consideration is feasibility, and this will depend on 3 main factors. Firstly, the constraints internal to the organisation, such as technical skills, and secondly, the constraints external to the organisation, such as the response of competitors, and lastly, the commitment of management and employees. Business risk also needs to be assessed because it may be unacceptable to the organisation, and also the attractiveness to stakeholders must also be taken into account, as some options may be more appealing than others to shareholders and employees. Again, if we look at the example of Tesco, we can see evidence of how they have approached the strategic questions around things like suitability and viability. These types of documents are full of key information which underpins the strategy of the business, and this is the sort of thing you should be looking at for your group assignment. The traditional strategic planning process can be problematic in a number of areas, and the first of these relates to the operating environment of the business. This we usually assume to be predictable, but numerous instances prove that this is incorrect in the real world. Planning procedure assumes that major strategic decisions are initiated by clear planning procedure, whereas strategic decisions in practice are often complex, multi-layered, and subject to management judgment. Top-down procedures also bring problems, as it is assumed that such procedures, from group HQs to individual strategic business units, represent the most efficient method for allocating funds and gaining management commitment, whereas research suggests that some managers find the process demotivating and unwieldy. Organisational culture can also be problematic. It's often assumed that organisational culture will allow the prescriptive model to operate, whereas some company cultures are in practice more suited to prescriptive approaches than others. For example, a strict strategic planning format may not be appropriate for a highly creative and experimental company. Strategy is generally centrally concerned with the selection of goals and objectives. Many people, including seasoned executives, find it much easier to set or try to achieve goals than to actually evaluate them. In part, this is due to a tendency to confuse values, which are fundamental expressions of human personality, with objectives, which are devices for the business to take action. In the case of Tesco, there's a broad range of individuals with the skills and expertise needed to develop an effective strategy. However, being a huge organisation means that it's also a huge organisational structure tasked with delivering this strategy, with different roles and responsibilities throughout. This can cause a strategy to become diluted or lost altogether in the day-to-day operation of the organisation. The effectiveness of long-term strategic decisions cannot be easily measured. And for many decision makers, strategy evaluation is assumed to be simply about how the business performs in relation to aspects such as revenue, profit, and how much cash is held in reserve, or how much of a dividend can be paid to the shareholders. The assumption here is that if things are going well, then the business strategy must be good. Whilst this assumption is perfectly logical, it misses the whole point of strategy completely, which is that short-term results do not necessarily indicate long-term growth, and by the time negative changes are noted at an operational level, it may already be too late to do anything about it. Therefore, strategy evaluation should look beyond the business's short-term performance and should instead concern itself with the long-term trends which would be expected to lead to long-term success for the business. The key to evaluating strategy is having a basic understanding of why the business as it currently stands exists at all, and how it assumed its current pattern in the first place. Once we obtain a good grasp of the basic economic foundation that supports and defines a business, it's then possible to study the consequences of key trends and changes. Without such an understanding, there's no obvious way of deciding what kinds of changes are most crucial and will simply become overwhelmed with the data that's around us. And if we take the case of Tesco, then we can see that the business is built in three core pillars, namely customers, channels, and product. These broad themes determine the key strategic focus areas of the business. But as we can see from this example, in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the underlying strategy, it's critical that there are supporting processes and performance indicators in place. Now, undoubtedly, Tesco has been able to maintain its dominant position in the marketplace despite fierce competition through a determined focus in these areas. But how do we find evidence of the effectiveness of this strategy? It's still important when determining the best strategy for the business to look back at the historical performance in order to determine what worked and what didn't. But the important thing here is that we look at the data over an extended period of time And from this, we're able to see the link between the strategy we employed and the long-term health and performance of the business, rather than just looking at a short-term window, which provides a snapshot of how the business has done over a short space of time. We also need to remember that it can take a very long time for strategic change to work its way through the business and generate visible results. In very large businesses, going through major strategic change could take years before tangible results of that strategy materialise. So if we take another look at an overview of Tesco's performance across a number of key areas, there's clear evidence that this strategy seems to be working. Sales and profit levels are up, cash flow is healthy, and debt is clearly falling. However, if we were to look at these results and compare them over the past 5 years, for example, then the business picture could be very different. Because for the group assignment you've been asked to look at a business which is underperforming, then you should look for clear evidence of poor performance, and this should be over an extended period of time, not just one financial year. And this could be defined in terms of sustained falling sales, reduced profits over time, staff redundancies, or a drop in share price value of the organisation. Whatever the indicators, you'll need to evaluate what this data means and ensure that you understand the broader trends behind it. It's not enough to say that the business is not performing well over the short term. You need to identify the strategic reasons behind this and make strategic recommendations around how performance could be improved. In terms of evaluating your business's performance, there's a wealth of information which you can draw on, such as annual reports, case studies, market intelligence reports, and also editorials and websites. As long as the sources you use are credible, then the choice is ultimately up to you. The evaluation of strategy option usually employs common and agreed criteria across the organisation, for example, the potential return on investment offered by each option or the contribution to value added for the shareholder. And here the strengths and weaknesses of such criteria need to be fully understood. The shareholder value added approach takes a broader perspective on evaluation, which seeks to determine the benefits to the whole business area rather than just the strategy itself. Cost benefit analysis has been successfully employed in the public sector, where benefits are broader and less easily quantifiable, but the main difficulty with this approach is where to place limits on the benefits and the costs. Strategy evaluation must also take account of the potential reaction of key stakeholders such as shareholders and employees, for example. And this means giving consideration to a variety of factors such as the financial risk to shareholders, employment levels for employees, management opportunities or redundancies, broader community issues such as environmental concerns, and also other aspects such as government response to strategy initiatives. The importance of who is actually evaluating and developing the strategy will vary from organisation to organisation. In some cases, this function will be carried out by a centralised group of senior managers, for example, and we see this in cases of acquisitions or major capital investment. But in other cases, you find that those immediately connected with the business area and individual senior managers may not actually have been consulted in advance, yet they may still be set challenging targets in connection with a new strategy. Two prime conditions are then needed to attempt to gain the commitment of senior personnel. Firstly, the strategy must be communicable, and secondly, the strategy must challenge and motivate important members of staff. But what happens to strategy when the future is uncertain? For example, where there is rapid technological change in an industry or market conditions are affected by war or natural disasters. These events can make it very difficult for leaders and decision makers to select the best option. So what answer does strategy have for this type of problem? Financial risk analysis means considering factors such as cash flow, breakdown and company borrowing requirements. Sensitivity analysis involves developing both optimistic assessments and pessimistic assessments of future performance. And scenario projections involve taking a broader view of future developments and can take a qualitative as well as a quantitative view. Whilst Simulation modelling provides the decision maker with a tool to try to predict the logical outcome of a given strategic approach by visualising possible outcomes. And again, if we look at the example of Tesco, then the key strategic risks here are clearly identifiable in their annual report. These risks include factors such as health and safety considerations, changes in technology and people-related issues. Most of the risks here are likely to be present in most large corporations, and again, this is something to consider for your group assignment. So in conclusion, strategy evaluation is the appraisal of plans and the results of those plans that affect the basic mission of the business. It's concerned with establishing the greatest long-term benefit by looking at operating results and also those larger factors which underlie success or failure in the various functions of the business. The result of this evaluation is the rejection, modification or validation of existing strategies and plans. Strategy evaluation is the outcome of activities and events which are shaped by the nature of the business itself, its systems, its structure, its history and its culture. Ultimately, a firm's ability to maintain its competitive position in the market may be best served by managers who are ultimately willing and able to understand and shape the business strategy within both the context of daily activity and the larger, longer term objectives of the company.